Joe, for that nice welcome. It's a joy to be here, and many old friends, including my good dear friend Mary Morris and Anna Lee, and Eric Stone is here, and also Michelle Wood from Dallas, Texas. Thanks for coming out tonight. I want to talk to you briefly about a few of the issues. We'll have some time for some questions and answers and disagreements and dissent. I like people who disagree with me. I really have no choice in my line of work as a left-wing journalist. I get a stack of mail out high every week from readers around the country who call me a fool, jerk, know-nothing, ignoramus, idiot. And then I read my negative mail. So I'm accustomed to a good lively debate, and I teach my classes that way, discussion-based. And even though we may not see eye to eye on the issue, we can always speak heart to heart, and that's really what good education is about. Before we start, it might be helpful to take a few moments of silence or reflection or prayer, if you believe in prayer. Some do, some don't. And think about all the people on this little planet, which Ernest Hemingway, in one of his better days, called a third-rate rock spinning around a second-rate sun. That's us. And think about all the people here with us who today have been or will be victimized by violence, whether military violence, economic violence, environmental violence, governmental violence, legal violence, illegal violence, domestic violence, homophobic violence, racial violence, violence towards the animals. And let's also remember the prisoners. Let's remember the refugees. Let's remember those without homes, without help, without hope. The friendless, those who have no access to lawyers or doctors or nurses or teachers or social workers. And let's also remember the people in our own lives who we might have helped out, but we were too busy to notice their pain. Or if we did notice, we turned away anyway. Let's take a few moments of silence or reflection or prayer and take care of that moral obligation. All right, thank you for that. It's good to do so when we come together like this and hopefully be energized by our commitments to making our lives more centered. As a journalist, I've been very lucky over the years to have interviewed many of the world's great peacemakers. Governor Martin Luther King when I was a reporter starting out in the South. I've interviewed Desmond Tutu from South Africa, Maywood Corrigan from Belfast, Sean McBride from Dublin, Perez Esquivel from Buenos Aires, Mother Teresa from Calcutta, Rigoberto Menchu from Guatemala, Muhammad Yunus from Bangladesh, all Nobel Peace Prize winners. And I'd always ask them toward the end of the interview, which is where you often get the best answers. How do we go about increasing peace and decreasing violence, which ought to be the purpose of our lives, if you wish to have a life with purpose? And almost always the answer came back, you need to go where people are. That's all that's going on, people with conflicts, and solving them either through violent force or nonviolent force. So I took their advice and went to a local public high school, in my office at the Post, a school without walls, at DC High School. Asked the principal, can I come in and teach a course on the philosophy of pacifism and the methods of conflict resolution? She said, well, we don't have a class like that, but come in and give it a try. One little problem, she said, we have no money, we can't pay you. We're a very poor school. I said, I didn't come for the dollar. I came to find out, can you teach peace? So the course began, and it went very well. It's not a very difficult course to teach. you read the literature of peace, and you read some Gandhi, King, Merton Day, Musty, Jesus, Francis, Amos, Tolstoy, Einstein, Buddha, Sojourner Truth, Adam Ballou, George Fox, John Woolman on the first day, and then we really get into it. And after I rattle off those names, someone always jumps up in the back row and says, how'd you ever hear of all those people? How come we haven't heard them? You haven't heard them for an obvious reason. You've been going to conventional schools where we teach everything but. How do I know that? Well, let me ask you two questions. How many of you went to a high school where they offered you courses either in peace studies or conflict resolution? Hands? Diana Wells, my former student, at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School. One hand goes up. If this was a peace-loving, peace-seeking, and peace-affirming society, every hand would have gone up. Second question. How many of you went to a high school where they required you to take algebra and geometry? All hands go up. So there's a good chance you graduate from high school as peace illiterates. Well, we make sure you graduate from high school knowing all about pi r squared times bonkazoids, crankazoids, dorkazoids, lunazoids, hemorrhoids, steroids, and asteroids. Who cares? I've never seen a help wanted ad for an algebraist. I haven't. Now, if you like algebra and geometry, that's okay. I think it's kind of odd anybody would, but it's good to have a few odd people around for diversity. Let me ask you a question. When's the last time you went out on a date with your husband, wife, sweetheart, or partner and leaned over during dinner time and said, oh, darling, what a precious moment this is. I've been waiting all day to tell you something. I'm in love with algebra. Now, if you've done that, we're going to get some therapy for you. You clearly have a problem. We should talk about our conflicts. While we talk about them, we have them every day. There was a study done recently by the American Psychological Association that found that the average American family, when it's together, has a conflict every 8 minutes. And those are the functional families. So this isn't some abstract issue we're talking about tinkering with the military budget. It's often who we're living with at home. I had a student at Diana's high school the other day. We spent a couple of weeks reading Gandhi, and she came up, was leading class, and she came up and said, this has all been very nice, hearing Gandhi's views about war and peace, but I go home to a war zone every night. My parents have been fighting each other for years, verbally and often physically. How do I stop that war? That's a good question. Maybe if we had her mother and father when they were in school and taught them some of the basics of conflict resolution, mediation, and how to deal with each other without violence, that might have been a more peaceful household. And that's one of the dark secrets, too, about the peace movement. I even hesitate to mention it. Many of the world's great peacemakers were wretched people at home. Gandhi, the great Gandhi, he was an awful husband for much of his life, domineering, absentee father. The Gandhis had 4 sons. The oldest boy was so angry growing up with his absentee father, said, I'm going to get even someday. As children often say. The time came. The boy was in his early 20s, and he wanted to really hurt his father. You know what he did? He joined the army. And that did get to Gandhi. Then he all but disowned the boy. And then the son said, okay, if that's the way you're going to treat him, now I'll really show you. He became dissolute, he contracted the awful disease of alcoholism, and became a prostitute. Gandhi's own son. Tolstoy, awful father, had 13 children. His wife was constantly depressed. He hardly knew the names of his children. He was angry at them because he was asked at a press conference one time, why are you always angry with the kids? He said, they never read my books. Well, maybe if you write shorter books, they would. Albert Einstein cruel to both of his wives. Martin Luther King, and we know the stories. Why can't the great peacemakers be that way at home? And it goes the opposite way to Harry Truman, a wonderful father. I got to know Margaret Truman a little bit. And Harry Truman idolized his wife. But what did he do, the great family man? He dropped 2 bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and killed tens of thousands of Japanese families. The family man did that. So it's crucial to take care of those at home first. And I make sure my students know that. It's a difficult subject for many people. A lot of people always ask, well, it's nice you old 60s hippies are still active. Hang in there now, Prof. I hear that one a lot. And then they say, well, where's it ever worked? Yeah, that one. That's a valid question. Well, since the mid-1980s, there have been at least 7 brutal governments overthrown by people who had no army, no tanks, no bombs, and no bullets. In 1986, Ferdinand Marcos driven from power in the Philippines by Catholic nuns who organized under Gene Sharp. Drove him out. No one thought that would happen. In 1988, Pinochet, driven from power, the Chileans organized and brought him down. It took a little time to do it, but they finally got a fair election. And right down, when you go down Sheridan Circle, then there's a little memorial right there where Orlando Letelier was assassinated by a car bomb. The terrorists were here first and killed by the Pinochet government supported by the Americans, the American government. Kissinger was involved in overthrowing Allende. Lech Walesa shipyard worked in Poland to draw the Soviets out. And when he took power from General Jaruzelski in the Polish parliament, he quoted Gandhi when the British left India. And Gandhi told Lord Mountbatten, he said, we never want to bring you to your knees, we just want to bring you to your senses. And Lech Walesa quoted that when the Soviets left. South Africa, Mandela, after 27 years in the Robben Island prison, became president of that country and invited to the inauguration of the warden. And during the ceremony, looked over and said, Warden, you locked me up for 27 years. I want to tell you something. I forgive you. That was a great moment, I thought. Yugoslavia, Milosevic driven from power. 2001, who did it? Not Bill Clinton trying to bomb him. He was driven out by college students who organized a strike for 2 years. And nobody was killed. Shevardnadze, Republic of Georgia, was driven from power. Now someone came to 20 years ago and said, you know, I think in the next 2 decades there's going to be at least 7 brutal governments overthrown by people who have no bullets and no bombs and no armies. You just said you were clearly dreaming that it will never happen. But it did happen. But if we don't teach it to the kids, they don't know about it. Unless we teach them peace, somebody else will teach them violence. And they're being taught very well. They're being taught by our governments, our courts. The Supreme Court believes in executing people on death row. Corporate America feasting off the military contractors. I was talking to one of my former students today, Eric Stoner, who took my class many years ago, and now he works for the War Resisters League. And one of his duties there is to find out what companies are profiting from Afghanistan and Iraq. Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, they're all feasting off Blackwater. And so that goes on. At the same time that those 7 governments were overthrown by people who had weapons of the spirit, which was Einstein's great line, rather than weapons of steel, what else was happening? The United States invaded Libya, Grenada, Panama, Somalia, Afghanistan, Sudan, Iraq. We've killed people in Pakistan and Yemen. All for what? Just to give a career boost to the generals and to make the military contractors richer. And we think that might sound a little radical talk until we read some of the essays that Martin Luther King wrote about during the height of the Vietnam War. As I'm sure you well know, King gave his last and final Sunday sermon half a mile from here, right at National Cathedral. And in that talk, it was a rousing talk. The real King finally surfaced. Not the safe, sanitized King, the eye of a dream King, that's fine. But the anti-war King, the King who was emphatic about it. Is this book going around anywhere right here? Is this book anywhere out there somewhere? Would you pass these books around to folks? On page 69 of this book, we have an essay by Martin Luther King where he talks about the United States government, and it says, I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos until, without first having spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. We don't hear that quoted by the media. They give the Eye of a Dream speech every January. There's going to be a memorial built to King down by the mall. I will take any bet you want that will not be cut out in stone. I'll give you any odds, Las Vegas odds, I'll give you anything you want. Nor will his next line where he talks about the money. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. That also was the real King. I make sure my students know about that. The current military budget, according to the Center for Defense Information, is $878 billion. That's too large a number to grasp unless you are an astronomer. You can't grasp it. You got to break it down. It comes down to $2.5 billion a day. Still kind of high. It comes out to $28,000 a second. $28,000, $28,000, $28,000. It's still a little bit abstract. You got to break it down some more. How much does each family pay in military taxes? Half of the discretionary budget goes to the Pentagon, given to it by Congress. The Pentagon's not the problem. It's a very apathetic public because we're never told how much we're paying. Does anybody know how much money you're going to give to the Pentagon this April? It's the only product that we have no idea how much they're taking from us and where's it going. Eric Stoner told me today that he figured out how much of our money goes every year to Lockheed Martin. That's the Lockheed Martin tax, because they're the biggest death contractor, and so we give money directly to them through the Congress. If we're not outraged by that, we got to figure out why is that happening. So we have a military budget that spends more on killing than healing. $2.5 billion a day is 10 times more than what the Peace Corps gets in a year. So we have a little work to do to organize and change things around. I know people have their hopes up with Obama, but I'm not exactly thrilled he wants to send more troops to Afghanistan. That is disappointing. It's disappointing also that he appointed his chief national security advisor, four-star General Jones. James Jones used to work for Condoleezza Rice and Wolfowitz. He's getting military advice from him. Well, we'll see what happens, but I don't think we ought to get our hopes up especially high when he wants to escalate the war in Afghanistan. And we see what's happening. There are two types of violence in the world. There's hot violence and cold violence. Hot is when you see it, you feel it, it's emotional. That was 9/11. We talk about it every day. The Virginia Tech massacre was hot violence. And then you have, it was interesting, 9/11. You heard the politicians talking about, oh, 9/11 changed the world forever. You still hear that line. I didn't hear that said about Rwanda changing the world forever. 800,000 were killed. Why didn't East Timor, 250,000 killed? When Gerald Ford said to Suharto, go ahead and invade, we won't stop you. Why not change the world forever? Hot violence is when you see it, you feel it, it's visceral, it's emotional, and then you have cold violence, out of sight. That's those executions on death row. There's 40,000 people a day who die of hunger or preventable diseases. See a little sheet of paper we gave out? See right on the front, right down in the bottom, that quote from Oscar Arias, the president of Costa Rica. Right in the middle, he says, 3 billion people live in tragic poverty and 40,000 children die each day from diseases that could be prevented. When's the last time you saw a newspaper headline? 40,000 died yesterday of preventable diseases. Rarely, if ever. That is cold violence. It keeps happening. You have 12 million animals a day in this country killed for food. You don't see how the animals suffer, how they're raised. It's disconnected. We don't make the connection between what's on our plate and how it got there. So I make sure I teach a couple of weeks of animal rights, and students really like it. I usually do it about 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. And usually teenagers like to go home and announce, okay, no more dead, rotting, chemicalized animal body parts for me, Mom. But the rest of you barbarians, keep eating it, go ahead. So it lets the kids take the high moral ground, plus insulting everybody while they're doing it. You get a real twofer. Then also, it's not enough to just there's two types of learning. There's theoretical learning and experiential learning. And the trouble with us teachers is we're so busy trying to make the kids smart kids, bright kids, get ahead kids, make all A kids, get into the Ivies and little Ivies, and avoid the poison Ivies. That was lame, that one was. So I tell them the first day of every semester, we're going to get outside the classroom this year and go become what Martin Luther King said. Let's try to become somebody who is other-centered, not self-centered. I believe in experiential learning, not theoretical. So I announced the first day of every semester, let's go work at one of the street kitchens, the jails, the migrant working camps, the prisons, the old age homes. Let's teach somebody how to read this semester. This country has about 40 million people who are illiterate. 4 years ago, that was about the same number of people that voted for George W. Bush. And might have been the same group. Now that was, all right, that was a little bit mean. That was a cheap shot, wasn't it? But it felt good, didn't it? All right, get all these lefties riled up. A correction on that one. Well, it was not the litter folks that voted for Bush. It was all those educated people in Palm Beach and Palm Springs. The litter folks knew better. I took the class the other day to a women's shelter. And as you know, there's really two Washingtons. There's a city of big buildings, big talk, big egos, big limousines. And then the real city, the city of high rates of illiteracy. We have 22 high schools here in Washington. We have the highest dropout rate of any school district in the country. I teach at Wilson High School every day. We have 1/3 of the students are making D's or F's. 1/3. And that's considered one of the best high schools in the city. I took my Georgetown Law School class the other day to a women's shelter. It's called Mount Carmel House, right on 5th and G Street, run by some Carmelite Catholic nuns. I take my classes there often because I'd rather have them see a sermon than hear a sermon. So we walked in the other day, and there were about 40 women hunched over their soup and saltines having their dinner, about 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. And the law class suddenly looked on in amazement. They began to wonder, who are these women? How did they fall in the streets? What happened to their lives? And they suddenly realized exactly what laws represent. The failure of love. That's all laws are, really. So the nun walks over and greets us, and I said, "Sister, I want to help out. I'll get back to my neighborhood, and I'll go around the block, and I'll fill up, and I'll get a lot of food and clothing for you. I'll bring it down next Saturday morning for the homeless women." Well, Sister looks up at me and says, "Oh, that's wonderful. We love it when you NPR and C-SPAN liberals come around with your Volvos filled up with food for us. It touches us oh so deeply." Sis had a slightly cynical side to herself that occasionally flared, and she said, listen, Buster." She called me Buster. If you really want to help out, skip all that fuzzy-wuzzy feel-good number, which you seem to have a special talent for. She gave me a whack like that. It was the beginning of Lent. She was having lemons for breakfast, I found out, as pedals, which ruined her day. Only the Catholics got that one, all right? And if you really want to help out, see that lady in the corner? She pointed to a bedraggled, toothless woman, wrinkled-skinned. She had the agony of the earth in her eyes. I said, "You mean just talk to her, that's all?" And the nun said, "Yes, you'd be doing plenty. Hardly anybody ever talks to the women here. Oh, you come around with little food bundles at Thanksgiving or Christmas and feel as though you're doing something. Sit down and talk to the women." And we did. And many of the law kids were forever changed by it. How do I know? That's one of the great joys of teaching. We get to keep up with the students long after they leave us. And I always ask them, 5 or 10, 20 years later, at the law class, I say, "What do you remember about your 3 or 4 years at the law school getting your JD?" And I expect they're going to tell me about that momentous day we all discussed the nuances of the 14th Amendment. They tend to forget that for some reason. But they sure remember the day we went to the women's shelter, because it woke them up and shook them up, as it almost always does. We don't need any more lawyers defending Scooter Libby and Martha Stewart. We don't need any more lawyers on K Street or Wall Street. We need them on U Street. We need lady in the corner lawyers. We need public interest lawyers. We need death penalty lawyers. We need poverty lawyers. And those who've been in those fields, they tend to have meaningful lives because they know what they're doing. If they weren't doing it, it wouldn't be happening. That's the highest praise anybody can say about your life's work. If I wasn't doing this, it would not be happening. So I take the classes out and I de-emphasize grading and testing and homework. there's a wonderful line from Walker Percy, the great novelist from New Orleans, who had that wonderful line, you can make all A's and go out and flunk life. I've seen it happen over and over. Your character is not developed by making all A's in school. And I worry about students who make too many A's. Did you relate to that? All right, yeah, very nice. One of our fine C students here tonight. Because you got to wonder, while they're grinding away, they make all those A's, what are they missing out on? What part of life are they not getting their hands dirty with? So that's why it's so valuable. And I've been teaching for 25 years at School Without Walls, and for many years, they're refixing the school a little bit now, refurbishing it, but for a long time it was just about the poorest school in America. And no cafeteria, no gym, no auditorium, no lockers, no athletic fields, and for the past couple of years, no clean drinking water. And it's the closest school to the White House, only 5 blocks away from power. We've been asking presidents to come talk to the kids. Can you make it 5 blocks? We asked Bush for 8 years, can't you come down? He was basically going around the country giving speeches in Texas, Ohio, Florida, California on school reform. Leave no child untested. That from a great C student in Andover. Couldn't make it 5 blocks. The students didn't mind, because they're not into big shots, they're into long shots, because they know they got to work twice as hard to make it. And many do make it. And so that's what, and people always ask, well, what's the state of peace education in the world right now in this country? Well, we're making some progress. In 1970, there was only one college offering a degree in peace studies, Little Manchester College in Manchester, Indiana, Little Church of the Brethren School. There's now about 70 degree programs. We have a lot of master's degree programs at George Mason. We have it at American University, Berkeley and Duke, and colleges, I think, in England. Limerick, Ireland has a master's degree program. Spain has one. One of my friend Eric Stoner went. And so there is some progress. It's tougher to crack the high schools. They're so pressured to get those test scores up. The teachers are demoralized right now by the politicians telling them how to run their schools. And when I read these columnists talking about education who never set foot in the classroom, or the teachers just laugh at these people because they don't know what they're talking about. The only way to find out is go into classrooms and find out what's going on there. And so you can argue that we're not making much progress in the high school level, and because the administrators see no room to put a class in there. I've been teaching at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School, and it took me 7 years to get this one little book approved, Strength Through Peace. I had to go to school board meetings, I had to go to student assemblies, talk to the curriculum committee, the curriculum subcommittee, and they said, I remember I spoke to the Montgomery County School Board one time, and they invited me to give me a little pitch. And I said, we have about 25 high schools in Montgomery County, and we ought to get peace studies taught in all the schools. So they heard me out. And at the end, one of the school board members says, well, we appreciate these views and we'll certainly ponder them. They love to ponder on school boards, where the word ponderous comes from. And then he said, I have a little problem. You kept using that phrase, peace studies. I said, what exactly is the problem? He said, well, the word studies is okay. But that other word, peace, can you come up with a new phrase? It's going to upset people out here in Montgomery County. I envision a headline next morning in the Post, Peace Studies Proposal, Alarm School Board. But the subhead, idea looked on as crazy and bizarre. And that's liberal Montgomery County. So that's what we're up against. And we have to take heart a little bit. There's a great line in here on a little sheet of paper. And we're going to stop and take a few questions and answers. Here's a wonderful line. See right over on the middle left, down below, that great quote by I.F. Stone, one of my all-time heroes, a great journalist, Izzy Stone. No one like him. He said, "The only kind of fights worth having are those that you're going to lose. Because somebody has to fight them and lose and lose and lose until someday somebody who believes as you do wins. In order for someone to win an important major fight 100 years hence, a lot of other people have to be willing for the sheer fun and joy of it to go right ahead and fight, knowing that you're going to lose." So I think that's crucial to know. I remember interviewing Dorothy Day, the great pacifist and anarchist, who said, "We're not called on to be successful, we're called on to be faithful." And it's good to remember that, because often you don't see progress. It's very hard to measure progress. It's very arbitrary. And very few of us will ever be called on to do great things, but all of us can do small things in a great way. Even if it's only talking to the lady in the corner, that counts. It all adds up. I'll just tell you one more story. I was lecturing down at the University of Kentucky a while back, and my host was one of the professors, a single mother in her late 50s, and she took me out to the airport the next morning. And right before I got out of the car, she leans over and says, "I used to be in the peace movement back in the 60s. I used to march at the Pentagon. I was arrested a couple times, but I'm not in the peace movement anymore." I said, "Why not?" She told a story about her son was home from college. He went to Yale University. He was home for the Christmas holidays, took the family car out. It was a rainy, icy, freezing night, and his car skidded off the highway and crashed into a tree head on. His spinal cord was severed. He would never walk again. He was paralyzed from pretty much from the neck down. His mind was fine. And the mother said, "I had a choice. I could put him into a home, a hospice. We had insurance money to take care of him, or I could become his nurse." I said, "What did you do?" "I took the second choice. I became his nurse. And that's why," she said, "I'm no longer in the peace movement." I said, "Wait a minute. You're in the peace movement like you never were, jumping up and down in front of the Pentagon. You're taking care of your boy." That is true peacemaking. You should never get an honorary degree, never be in Larry King, never write books about it. And very few people know of her sacrifice, but she knew and her boy knew. So it's good to keep that in mind. We tend to want to do great deeds. We just do small things in a great way. And that too is great progress. So we have a little time for some questions and answers and comments.